Off.
Yeah. Okay. It says we're live, and I do a lot of I do everything on here. So if people ask questions and stuff, um, so I always like to engage with the audience, and if they have questions of you, I try to ask you and answer you, so that way you and I are with each other as opposed to you looking down. So I will be looking down occasionally and answering questions and whatever that is, and sharing and all that fun stuff. And I think you can do the same thing if I tag you. Yep. So I'm going to tag you, and then you can start sharing. Which is always fun. I'm going to give people a couple minutes to wander in. Facebook Live is so different these days. It's fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, okay. We're almost at 7 o'clock.
All right.
I know. Good stuff. Good stuff. And you're in the middle of Missouri, is that right?
Southwest corner.
Okay.
The Ozarks.
The Ozarks are beautiful.
Yeah, they're
we've
great.
Had this conversation. I was born in Fort Smith.
They're fantastic.
Yeah. Lots of. Yeah, I really, I do want to know about this whole, you're a professional, I'm going to call you a Sherpa.
Okay.
Because that is kind of what you do, right?
Kind of, yeah. Kind of what I used to do a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of what you do. Yep. Oh, good. See, now I can share to people. Good. All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're coming up on 7 o'clock. Got a couple people watching us, so let's just dive right in, shall we?
Sounds good.
Yeah, good. So, welcome, everybody. For those of you that are going to tune in, my name is Jan Edwards, and I'm the president and founder of Paving the Way Foundation. And with me tonight is my new friend. We've known each other for about a month now, Dan Nash. And Dan and I connected on LinkedIn, and we've had several just really great conversations. And I knew we would be fast friends because the first time we talked on the phone, if you recall, it was for like an hour and a half. We just chat, which I love, right? And similar values, similar goals, similar missions, and I just really appreciate you being a yes to be on our Parent Tech Talk this month.
Of course.
So
yeah, they're looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I'm going to have you just share a little bit of your law enforcement background, and then I've got a question I'm just burning to ask. So I want you to share with people, who you are and how you ended up like here on this call with me.
So as Jan said, my name is Dan Nash. I live in the beautiful Ozark Mountains of Southwest Missouri, and I recently retired as a Missouri State Trooper, where I had been for 27 years. And the last 24 years of my career, I was in some phase of an investigative unit of some kind. I did 6 years working undercover, and then I did violent crime. And the best part of my career which was the last part, and that was I ran the human trafficking unit. And I supervised the enforcement side of the Missouri Attorney General's Human Trafficking Task Force, which was like all of our operations and things. And that was honestly probably the most rewarding and the best part of my 27-year law enforcement career.
Wow. And why do you say that?
I mean, law enforcement can be a hard job, right? And
yes, it can be. I have
And
many friends across the country that are in law enforcement, so it's yeah.
and I think, you know, fresh out of college, I was young and stupid, and I thought I'm going to change the world. And you get out there and you get into it. And I think there are times in law enforcement that you know there's the politics of it all, and then there's the job and everything that comes along with the job. And I think at times you get frustrated because you feel like you're not changing the world. You feel like you're not
Right.
doing what you thought you were going to be doing, which is helping your community and changing your community and changing your state. And many times you get drug into, you know, the political mumbo jumbo and elections and all this other stuff that none of us want to be involved with, but we get caught up in all that stuff
Right.
just because we're in law enforcement for no other reason.
Right.
And then, you know, it just gets frustrating, and you get to the point where you really feel like you're kind of just cleaning up a mess all the time, that you're not really able to prevent things or to help people like you thought you were going to be able to. I mean, in violent crime, I would just go from homicide to homicide to homicide, and you just feel like, man, I'm not fixing this. I'm not stopping this. I'm just showing up after the fact, right? But at least in human trafficking, I felt like, you know, I'm actually helping these people. I'm actually saving them from this horrible, horrible crime. You know, sometimes kids, sometimes adults, that doesn't matter.
Right.
It's just you're helping someone, whether it's at a hotel room or a truck stop or working on a boulevard or at a casino, it doesn't matter, but you're at least helping someone. And then you get to see the fruits of those labors, I guess, so to speak, when someone is able to get out of that life, and maybe 2 years or 3 years or whenever it is later, you see them and they've completely changed. And now they, you know, they're married, or they have a boyfriend, or they have a job and they have a driver's license, and they're just pursuing the American dream like all of us want to do.
Yeah.
And
They're
I don't,
living the life that they were destined to live
yeah.
versus what they were really forced into living.
Yeah. And that makes you feel really good. That's why you sign up. That's why you work nights and weekends and holidays and get bottles thrown at you, and you work for terrible money. And that's why you do all that, is because you just want to help people, right?
You work for terrible money. Yeah, that's funny. You know, you on your Facebook page and on your LinkedIn page, you have a picture of you with a hat, and it's very cold outside, and glasses, and you know there's clearly mountains behind you. Tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me about the whole mountaineering, mountain climbing, mountain, and how you can see that correlating to what you're doing right now.
So growing up here in the Ozarks, I grew up on a farm out in very rural part of the state. You know, people would make fun of us, I know. And, you know, if you're from one of the coast, you're flying over the Ozarks, that's where all the hillbillies live. But there's some truth to that in certain respects, at least when I was growing up here in the 70s. And so I spent a lot of time outside, you know, backpacking, hiking, you know, hunting, fishing. That's what you do. And because of that, I was very, very outdoorsy. And I remember when I was going to college, and even when I was graduating college, I was thinking, okay, what do I really want to do with my life? And the first thing I probably would have wanted to do was, I probably would have wanted to be the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. But at the time, Joe Montana was the quarterback, and I wasn't getting him out of the way.
I was there when he was quarterback.
Yeah. I wasn't moving Joe Montana out. So couldn't do
No, no,
that.
no.
So then I thought, you know, I really want to be a mountain guide, because I loved climbing mountains. I loved all this outdoor activity. But in, you know, when I graduated college, that would have been 91, I guess. There was no way to make money being a mountain guide. I was going to have to like live in a van and be like a dirt bag. And I'm like, I got to actually get a job, right? A real job. So I decided to be a trooper. And then on the side, climb mountains and continue to climb mountains. And that's what I did. And eventually became like a professional climber on the side when I wasn't, doing my government job, and then opened up a business and guided people to mountains all around the world. And I think I've led expeditions in like 14 countries, like 60 expeditions or something. So,
wow.
That's where that photo comes from, is me. I think that photo was in Peru, if I remember right. We were on a mountain in Peru, and
Okay.
so that's where it comes from. And I love the mountains. I don't mind the cold. I love being
Yeah.
in the mountains. I love being, and I think one of the reasons I like it so much is because that's how I grew up. And number two, it allows me an escape from all the other stuff that I see. So it allows me to leave some of that stuff behind. And
Well, and
it helps me.
it's a great place to clear your mind too. You know, it's a
Yeah. I
great
mean,
place for you to
fresh
step away
air, clean
from.
air.
I'm thinking body to body to body to body, right? You're going dead body to dead body to dead body. I'd want to go hiking too. I'd want to do anything to get that stuff out of my head. Um, and I hear the correlation, because when you're mountain climbing and you've got to be aware of your surroundings, you've got to be aware of the danger around you, you've got to, if something happens, you've got to be prepared.
Sure.
And you also have to be a little investigative to which is the best path, which is, what's the weather going to be like, and all of that. So um, match up for me the skills that you brought from being a professional mountain climber, right, and guide, over to investigating human trafficking.
Well, you hit on some of them. I mean, you have to think ahead. You have to plan ahead. As a climber and as a mountain guide, you have to think about protecting your clients, right? And I tell people all the time, as a mountain guide, people don't pay us to get them to the top of a mountain. People pay us to get them home. People
Yes.
pay us to get them home to their loved ones. That's why they pay us. And I think human trafficking is the same way. My job is to, first and foremost, to find these poor souls that are being victimized and to rescue them, to get them out of there. If I don't do
Right.
anything else, if I never make an arrest ever, okay, so be it. But I can go around and I can rescue these folks that need help, right?
Right.
Because I think so much of what the general public thinks law enforcement does is our whole goal is just to run around and arrest people, and that's not it. On my patch when I was in uniform way, way, way long ago, it said service and protection, and that's what. And there's something to that, right? It's protecting people and serving people, and so yeah. So that crossover to the mountains is you're protecting people, you're getting them home, you're always being prepared for in case something bad happens. You are trying to rescue a girl and some trafficker comes out with a gun. You got to be prepared,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like you said, the weather, crevasses, things like that in the mountains. You got to be prepared for all that in a law enforcement job too. How are we going to go? How are we going to get to this hotel room? How are we going to get to this house? How many people are going to be need? What's going to be our plan? What's going to be our strategy? How are we going to do this? And then, protecting that individual and being really victim centered and cognizant of their PTSD and their trauma bonding and all that kind of stuff. So it's very similar, actually, I guess.
Yeah. When I just thought it was fascinating with that picture. It's like, well, how did that all start? And I am clear, it also totally correlates to human trafficking, and you hit on something so powerful. It's to protect and serve, protect being the key. And 8 years ago when I started this organization, people thought I was nuts. They're like, Jan, why don't you want to be on the rescue side? Why don't you want to have a safe house? Why don't you want to fill in the blank, right? And I'm a business person. My background is in marketing and advertising. I ran multi-million-dollar line items for a Fortune 100 telecommunications company, right? So my brain functions a little differently. And I'm like, look, I've met people that have come out of the life. They've shared their stories with me. I just as soon prevent that. Thank you. Right.
Yeah.
I just as soon cut that off at the pass such that there is no need for someone to be rescued. There is lower, PTSD, there is less trauma, all of that. So tell me a little bit about, when you, like your very first case and when you started to make the correlation to, oh, this is different. Like this is different than, homicide. This is different than, and how are you utilizing those skills now in your human trafficking center, which I just think is super cool.
So it really started for me in about 2011-ish, probably 2010, 2011. I was in violent crime, and I would see things where gang members are shooting each other over girls or whatever, but we just didn't put it together because no one ever told us anything about human trafficking. We were never taught anything about human trafficking. Back in those days, I don't even think we knew what human trafficking was. And so I started going, there's got to be more to this. There's got to be more to this. And where it really started was with one girl. And I remember talking to her, and I remember she was with this older guy, and I was pretty certain he was probably her trafficker. And I was using what skills I had been taught. I'd been a detective for like 15 years or 17 years or whatever it was at that point. And I was using the skills that I was using on murder investigations and other kinds of cases, which don't really work very well in human trafficking, by the way. So I'm using these skills, and I'm talking to her. And the more I'm talking to her, the more mad she was getting, until she was getting really pissy with me. And I'm sitting there thinking in my head, why is she so mad? I'm trying to help her. I think this is her trafficker over here. And the more I'm asking her and the more I'm talking to her, the madder she's getting. I mean, she's madder than a hornet. And I'm like, what is going on? And finally, I just got frustrated, and I said, fine, okay, fine, you're free to go. And they took off and they left. And 3 months later, I get a call from another law enforcement agency and said, hey, do you know this lady? And she was like 21, I think, 22. And I said, yeah. And they said, yeah, well, we found your business card in her purse, because I'd given her my business card. And I'm like, what's going on with her? And they said, we found her in a bathtub at a Rent by the Week hotel. She had cut her wrist. She's dead. No sign of any kind of, homicide or anything like that. It's clearly a suicide. But she was a cutter. She'd cut her wrist numerous times previously because she had the scars all over. She had bruises all over her body from a pretty significant beating, but the bruises were probably a week or so old. And on the lip of the bathtub, there was a photo of a little boy, probably 1 or 2. And the PD had tracked down this girl's mother, and to notify her about her daughter. And the mother had told them that she had been molested by a neighbor when she was 9, and she went down a wrong path after that. She had all kinds of problems in school. She ended up not graduating school. She was dating older men. She was drinking. She was using drugs. She was running away from home. I mean, the typical story that we get all the time. And the mother hadn't even seen her for like 2 years until social services called her to tell her that they were at a hospital and that her daughter had had a son, and the son had tested positive for methamphetamine, and the social services was taking the son away from her and was trying to replace the son with grandma. And that was the photo on the lip of the bathtub that was there. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking to myself, I let this girl down. I mean, I didn't do a damn thing because I didn't know what to do. And I was pretty sad about it. And I thought, I'm not going to let that happen again. I've got to figure this out. I've got to get some proper training. I've got to look at this differently than how we do all these other investigations in law enforcement, because it is so different. And I just didn't want to let anybody else down. And that's really what started it for me.
Yeah. When we go out and we talk to people, they always come up and say, there was this one time, like I'm at Liaison Labs in Orlando, and the CEO, when, we started talking about what I do, she looked at me and, just kind of washed over her. And she remembers at, a very young age in New York, walking past a church and the basement, remember how in New York, right, the basement windows are right there on the street, right? And there was this
Yeah.
young boy, face plastered against the wall, from what she could tell, had no clothes on at the top, and, mouthed the words, "Help me." She's 9 years old. Traumatized her. It was right
Yeah.
down the street from her. And she's like, "I've never forgotten it, Jan, because I didn't know what to do." So you going out and training and preparing law enforcement is so important. The work we do going out and training and educating youth is so important, because it's I don't want them to get to the point where law enforcement has to find them, especially not in a
No.
bathtub, you know.
No.
But it minimal, I know, with people like you and a couple of other organizations out there, I now know that if something happens, right, these law enforcement officers will show up with compassion, they'll show up with caring, they'll show up with um, knowing what signs are what. And you said something really important, and that was she was sexually assaulted as a child.
Yeah.
And
That's
that's,
such a common thing we see.
yeah, and that's
In
what
fact,
led down this path.
I don't know that I've ever interviewed a girl that's in the game or in the lifestyle that was not sexually abused as a child. I mean, it's rare. I mean, and if they weren't sexually abused, they were physically abused,
Mm-hmm.
but it's usually they were sexually abused, by Uncle Jim or grandpa or mom's
Right.
boyfriend or neighbor down the street or somebody, cousin. And that's usually what starts the whole process.
Yeah. um you know it's that one case started you down this path, and you're like, I let her down, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to go do everything I can think of to do to educate myself and prepare myself. So, what are some of the tactics that you work with law enforcement on? What are some things that you educate them on, that, if we've got any law enforcement that watch this video later, that they can be like, oh, that's really good, I never thought about that. That's really great point of view. Like, what are some things that you could share with law enforcement?
So unfortunately in America, and I mean, this is hard to believe. I mean, we're the greatest country on the planet, and yet 16% of our law enforcement officers have training in human trafficking. That's it. 16%. And
16%?
across the United States, 16% have and that's from a 2020 study that I think UNLV did. Only 4% of law enforcement across the country have a full-time human trafficking unit of any kind. 4%. So you can see that we're kind of behind the 8 ball when it comes to human trafficking training. And then when you do look into what law enforcement does, to combat this, what do? They go out to the street, or they go out to the boulevard, or they go to a hotel, or they go somewhere where they're having quote unquote prostitution problems, and then they arrest all the girls, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we refer to as the 100-year-old model, because we've been doing that for 100 years and it hasn't worked, but we keep doing it. So what we want to do in the human trafficking training centers, when we teach law enforcement all across the country, is we want to teach this paradigm shift. And this paradigm shift is, these girls are all victims. And the research pretty much backs all that up. It varies a little bit. There's certain research that says, 88 to 92%, and other research says, 93 to 97%. But the research is consistent that somewhere around 1% of all these girls that are out there would probably be out there because they want to be. So really 99% of them don't want to be there.
Right.
So they're really victims. And not only were they usually victimized as a child, but they've been victimized all along the way, right? Because now they have these vulnerabilities, and this trafficker picks up on those vulnerabilities. And whether he wants to be her boyfriend or whatever the situation is, he's grooming her. And then eventually, she's in the lifestyle and she's working, making money, and he's keeping all the money. And if she doesn't do what she's supposed to do, then, he beats her, he does whatever he's going to do to control her, gets her hooked on drugs and alcohol and all the other things that they do. So making that paradigm shift that these girls are not prostitutes, they're not hookers, they're not hoes, they're not, lot lizards, they're not, there's lots of other terms I can use. It's not PG rated, but that's what we all think, right? They're the problem people from the wrong side of the tracks. And what research tells us is it's not any one socioeconomic group, it's not any one race. None of that matters. Doesn't matter if you're rich, doesn't matter if you're white, doesn't matter if you're black, doesn't matter if you're poor, doesn't matter if you're Latino, doesn't matter if you're Asian. What matters is what vulnerabilities you have. And those vulnerabilities generally are, I was sexually or physically abused, loneliness, could be you have image issues. It could be 100 different vulnerabilities, right? And that's usually what starts the whole process. And so what we want to teach law enforcement is have the paradigm shift. Remember, they're all victims. Look for the vulnerabilities. And then we just want you to obviously just be a human and treat them as they were your daughter or your niece or your nephew or your cousin or somebody like that, right? And then we can get into all the other stuff of what patrol officers can look for and how they can, do this and the special way that we created on how you talk to victims, something we call the special victims methodology to get them to trust you and talk to you, and all that other stuff that comes along with how to do this kind of really specialized police work.
It really is specialized police work. And, it's interesting because, those statistics that you shared they're frightening to me that only 4% of law enforcement has a HT unit. We've got, and I'm going to say a bunch of numbers and we can dispute them, debate them all day long, but you and I won't because we know better, right? Is I go by the phone calls from Polaris, right? They get phone calls. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of victims in the United States. It's millions worldwide, according to the International Labor Organization. I think on their website, they quote 43 million people. Yeah. We know last year, the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, their online enticement was up 98%.
Yeah. COVID was bad for human trafficking.
Well, it was good for human trafficking, bad for people.
You're right. That's that's what I meant.
Predators knew.
Yeah, and the traffickers. They were home all day, just grooming and looking for victims. That's all they were doing.
Exactly.
And the kids were at home all day surfing the net because they were bored and didn't have anything, and they were lonely because they couldn't even go hang out with their friends. So couldn't go to school. It was the worst case scenario for kids.
Oh, it was awful. And I knew it, like last March, I remember sitting in a parking lot. I was sitting in the Publix parking lot. I'm in Orlando and UCF, University of Central Florida, just sent out a, thing. We're closing all of our classrooms. And I remember forwarding that post and going, you watch, public schools are next. And as soon as I hit send, I was like, oh my God, in the state of Florida, we just put 3.2 million children at risk. Yeah. Suicide rates were up. Depression was up. Suicide rates were sky high. Was up. Yeah, my best friend's a funeral director in California, and she said suicide rates for young men 18 to 34 up like 118% over the past year. Mm-hmm. This pandemic has done so much damage, way beyond what the virus has done, that it's like incomprehensible right now. 50 years from now, when people look back, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, right? Unintended consequences. Quite frankly.
Yeah, they were, those were consequences that the virus did not cause. Those were consequences that man caused.
Exactly. Danny, one of my friends, Danny, had a question. She said, first, thank you for all you're doing for training police officers. And she asked, how do we replicate what you're doing all over the United States? It's a great question.
So actually, we are trying to do that. In fact, today I was on the phone with Arkansas and Utah about putting on some training. And we have trainings scheduled in Kansas City and St. Louis, of course. We have 5 trainings in Arkansas we're doing. We have multiple ones in Oklahoma, it looks like are going to happen. We have Minnesota, we have Wisconsin, we have Michigan, we have Florida. I'm working on bunches in other states. So we are trying to replicate this all over the country. Unfortunately, there's a couple of hurdles that we have encountered. And these are kind of man-made too. So the hurdles are only 16%, as we talked about, have training. So that means that's a lot of training to do all across the country, right?
Oof, yeah.
So it costs money to put trainings on. And unfortunately, rural law enforcement, if you're in a rural state or a rural part of a state, rural law enforcement has always been underfunded because we have less people, you have less tax base, you don't have, all the big stores like Walmart and Lowe's and Home Depot and all those kinds of companies that are paying into the tax base. It's very rural. And so getting training to them is more problematic because they don't have a lot of money. So historically, what has happened is we've had a lot of trainings in the big metro areas. Those metropolitan areas and those areas that have more funding can pay for training, and then they will also allow and invite other law enforcement agencies to participate in that training that maybe couldn't afford it. But with everything that's happened the last few years, a lot of these municipalities have been defunded in some way. So, for example, in Kansas City, we have 4 trainings we're doing with KCPD, and all of those trainings are paid for with private funding, private donations, because there was no training money available because they lost millions of dollars in their budget. So they didn't have any money. And so I think, well, number one, I know Jan already knows this, but I don't think the government or law enforcement can solve human trafficking alone. It has to be the community that really is doing this with law enforcement. It just has to be that way. It's number one, it's the government, and priorities can change with one election. So I think long term, the government's never going to solve human trafficking, but the community and the public can have a huge say. And I think they don't even realize how much of a say they can have. It's the hospitals and the casinos and the truck stops and the bus depots and the schools. The schools are an amazing funnel point of stopping human trafficking for the future, right? And there's all these different places. And then if you can get like nonprofits and all these other people together, and then they can work, and we can put on trainings for law enforcement, even when law enforcement can't afford it, then it's everybody coming together, and then everybody has skin in the game, and we can all do amazing work. The faith-based community does a lot of this. In fact, they pay for a lot of these trainings. So there's lots of people that can get involved and help in a variety of different ways. So the goal is, and I'm trying to answer her question, the goal is to take this all across the country until we can get, basically there's about 700,000 police officers in America. And think about that. If we had 700,000 police officers in America that were trained, how would that make a difference? And here's my example. So we had one agency that had 1,000 police officers, and we trained that entire department. Took us like 2.5 years. Okay. We trained all 1,000 police officers. Before we started the training, they had 0 victims identified. 0. Wow. None. And they had no human trafficking investigations going at all. 0.
Right.
The first year, that number went from 0 to 41 investigations, 6 rescues. The second year, that number went to 171 incidents, 25 rescues. The third year, that number went to 385 incidents, 47 rescues. So literally, we're moving from 0 to 47 rescues just by one agency within the 3 years or 2.5 years it took us to train 1,000 police officers.
Wow.
Just multiply that times 700,000 and tell me how many victims we can rescue.
Exactly. And you and I have talked about partnering up in Oklahoma. where
Yeah.
you go in and talk to law enforcement, and we go in and talk to the kids, and then together we talk to the community and the parents. And to me, I think partnering, public private partnerships is the most powerful way to really interrupt anything, in particular human trafficking, because first of all, none of us is as smart as all of us, and I can't do everything. You can't do everything. And there's other NGOs there that can't do everything. They might claim to do everything, but they really can't. In reality,
No,
they really
no
can't.
way.
So I think that the creating task forces has been instrumental, as long as they're functional, right? I'm proud and happy to say that my friend Maurice Edwards started the Seminole County Human Trafficking Task Force, and he slid off, and I was voted in chairperson, and I get to take on this really great task force that was already had a phenomenal foundation, because I think that's how we educate the community. And because law enforcement's partners with us, they have to be trained too.
Of course. Yeah. We train
They
medical
have to be
people.
trained
We
too.
train
Yep.
victim advocates, because when you do like an operation of some kind, those victim advocates have got to go with you. They got to be there, right? They got to be
Absolutely.
at the command post, ready for those victims to come in, and ready to help them in all these different ways. And they've got to be there. So we train we train the victim advocates right along with the police when we're doing our operations class. And then we have a specific class that we do like for hospitals and stuff, because the stats for hospitals are just as bad for law enforcement. The research is 88% of victims utilize the medical facilities while they're being trafficked, and only 4% are ever, identified. So 4% of all the victims in America are identified as they're going through the hospital system, but yet 88% of them are using the hospital systems, right? And I didn't even know this, until I really started getting into human trafficking, that just like the police don't get human trafficking training, doctors and nurses don't either. So
no, they don't.
how are they supposed to know? And the answer is they're not.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
you got to train them.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to repeat that again, and I'm typing that in. It's 88% of victims they've been through the hospital system, right? And was it 4%?
4% are reported.
4%? Wow.
And so I routinely interview survivors that, and I'll ask them, what were your relationships like with law enforcement? What were your contacts with law enforcement? And I think the average is probably somewhere 15 to 20 contacts with law enforcement. And I'll ask them, well, what were they, positive or negative? And usually they were negative. And so then we'll talk about why and whatever. And I'm trying to learn from them, right? And then I'll ask them about hospitals. The most I've ever got out of a survivor out of a hospital was she had went 62 times.
62 times?
And no one ever reported anything.
Wow.
Never.
Wow.
We have a survivor that we work with that does training with us. And the only time she says that anybody from a hospital actually asked her anything, the doctor, apparently, she was in there because she'd been beat up really bad by her trafficker. She had like a busted bone up here on her cheek.
Bone.
Yeah. And she also had a dislocated shoulder and some other stuff. And he had to figure it out, because he literally asked her, how much do you charge? What? And then she said another time she heard a nurse and a doctor joking with her, or not joking with her, but joking about her in the hallway, because the reason she was in the hospital is because she had a really bad client who had inserted something inside of her that should definitely never have been inserted inside of her. And she had to go to the hospital because it hurt her. And they were basically laughing about it in the hallway.
Wow.
And she's like, I would never disclose to those people.
No. It's I've trained at several hundred health professionals as well, and they're always blown away by the subtle things that we share about. You've got to look for blisters, stretched jaw muscles on children, blisters, body parts, and if an 8-year-old shows up with an STD, if you're not going, what's that about? Then there's something off, right? Because they're not sexually active at 8 by choice. They're not. They don't even know what the body parts are, And I was reading the article about Backpage, and it said child prostitution. I'm like, there is no child prostitution.
No, by definition, it's illegal.
There is no child prostitution. There's trafficking of children and exploitation of children, but children don't choose.
So terms like child prostitution and sex worker, that's another one that you'll hear. Places like Backpage and other places that were in, making money off of this industry, they were always promoting that. And traffickers promote that all the time. I hear them. Oh yeah, the sex work, it's sex workers, because they're trying to, I think, kind of make that mainstream, make that, acceptable. But it shouldn't be, right? I mean, no girl or boy in any country on this planet sits around and goes, when I grow up, I would really like to perform sex on strangers all day. Oral sex, vaginal sex, anal sex, whatever. Maybe catch diseases, maybe get hooked on drugs and alcohol, maybe get stabbed and beat up from time to time. Man, I would really have life licked if I could just do that. Nobody does that. It's such a fallacy.
No one chooses to be raped 10 to 25 times a night. And that's where the misperception of ladies of the night, kind of thing. And I was teaching at a high school and one of the kids, well, what about the girls down on OBT? And I said, that's a really great question. I bring compassion when I talk to these kids because they don't know. They just don't know. They know what they hear and they know what they, read about. And
sure.
I said, it's a great question. I said, let me ask you one back, man. He said, sure. And I said, given that most women, not all, but most women are raped anywhere from 15 to 25 times a night, do you really think, she chooses that? I didn't have to say anything else. No. He got it. And so the rest of the class, right? Because you could see the synapses firing and it just washed over them. Like I hadn't even thought about that before because it's been so, in movies, in books, in stories, women have been trained to use sex to get what they want.
Mm-hmm.
What they want. Well, no. No woman, no little girl, no little boy, no 10-year-old boy or girl or 15-year-old boy or girl chooses that, and having and really bringing that kind of knowledge and information, I think, to parents is imperative. And so I want to get to the underbelly, right? You and I talked about what's happening online, and I really want to get to the underbelly of what's happening to our children in the online space. I shared earlier that the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, NCMEC, they reported a 98% increase of enticement. There were over 65 million cyber tips of child sexual abuse material reported last year. It's huge, right? And you and I talked about stranger danger. So why don't you share a little bit about that?
Well, you and I are maybe older than some people listening. And back when we were in school, back in the really old days, right, Jan?
Really
stranger danger. We were taught stranger danger, and stranger danger is, it's that guy that's driving that white van around the neighborhood, and he's got like a long hair and like 3 teeth in his head and a bunch of tattoos, and he's got a piece of candy and a puppy in the van with him. And he pulls up next to you and he's like, hey, you want to see my puppy? I'll give you some candy, little girl, you know what I mean? Or a little boy. Mm-hmm. And we were always taught, stay away, stranger danger, right? Stay away. Well, parents nowadays let that guy in that van in their house every single night. And he doesn't drive through the neighborhood anymore. He's driving that van and he's showing up on your kid's phone or your kid's laptop. And that's where he's talking to you. If you have teenagers and they have access to the internet on their phone, and you do not think that they are being bombarded by traffickers and predators, because traffickers and predators are two different kinds of criminals with two different kinds of gratification, but they're both being bombarded and talking to these kids every day. Your kids just aren't telling you, and you just don't know it. That's the thing. Yeah. You just don't know. But
and it's a numbers game. There's a little girl here in Apopka that was groomed and recruited in 8 days on Instagram,
which is about average.
Willingly got into a car of a 26-year-old male that had driven down from Georgia to get her. Willingly.
I think we've talked about this before, but there's stats out there where, high school students have admitted, like about a third of them have admitted that they met a stranger in person that they met online. So a third of our high school kids have in person met someone who they only knew from online. Now, as a parent, that should absolutely terrify you to know that your 16, 15, 17-year-old daughter went and met someone who they had no idea who they were.
Yep.
And they met them in person online. I mean, that's
staggering.
It's totally staggering.
And the thing that the kids, that's why it's so important. I'm just so passionate and committed about getting this information into the children, because they think this guy or girl likes them. And when I, share with them, it's going, this is a numbers game, my friends. This guy is telling 400 14-year-old girls they're beautiful and they're hot and he wants to be their boyfriend. Yep. I said they're telling 300 young boys positioned themselves as girls, great abs, can you send me a picture? It's a numbers game, because if they throw the net out wide enough and 10 or 15 respond back, and then out of that another third respond back, and then all it takes is that one picture, that one inappropriate picture, and the moment it leaves your phone, you can never get that back.
And these, if you think these traffickers and these predators are not working Facebook and not working Instagram, I mean, that's their go-to, right? People think, oh, that's on the dark web, that's in some secret place. It's not. It's not. I did a deal the other day with a guy he's like a professional athlete guy, or was a professional athlete, and now he's got a podcast, and it doesn't come out yet. It will be another couple months, but I showed him this, and I went on Craigslist, not anywhere weird, just Craigslist, right? Craigslist doesn't have an escort area or anything like that anymore, but you can go to Craigslist and you can go to like Misconnections or some place like that on Craigslist. And literally, this is the ad. I put no photo, and the ad was 26-year-old single female with twin 9-year-old daughters looking to make some extra money. How many responses do you think I got in the first 24 hours?
100.
Close, yeah. Pretty close. One was a guy who was involved in a church and basically said, if you want to come to our church, I can put you to work doing some office chores, maybe doing some landscaping. We have some clothing and things at the church we can give you and your daughters if you need it. There's some services at the church. The rest of them, every one of them, either wanted to have sex with the 26-year-old girl and were willing to pay her, or wanted to have sex with the two daughters. Yeah. And one person even offered to pay $1,500 a month to let the 26-year-old and the two daughters live in his house with him.
Wow.
That's on Craigslist.
Yeah.
Another one of my favorite ads to put out is 14-year-old boy needs to make some extra money to buy an Xbox. And you'll get 50, 60 people talking to you in 24 hours. And they're offering you all kinds of money for all kinds of stuff. And none of it's good.
No. I was speaking at a church in Arizona earlier this year, and I was sharing, they will, hey, if you send me a picture, I'll send you tokens to level up, right? And the moment that, maybe it just starts off as a selfie, just like me and you, normal selfie, everything's covered, right?
Sure.
Then the next is, well, why don't you show me one with a t-shirt, show me one without a t-shirt, the next thing you know, they're asking for body parts. And the moment that, again, picture leaves that phone, and one of the kids came up to the youth pastor and said, that just happened to me last week. Somebody on a game I was playing asked me for a picture.
Yeah. Parents hate it when we say this, but I don't know of anybody that works human trafficking full time that lets their kids have internet on their phone.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't know anybody that does it full time that lets their kids. My business partner, Allison, has got 3 teenagers, a daughter who's 13, and then she's got a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old boy. And all 3 of them have phones. They can text mom. They can call mom. They can call their friends. They can do all this stuff. They don't have internet on their phone.
Or social media?
I don't think they have social media on their phone either. No, they don't.
Yeah.
And but she ran the task force for the Missouri Attorney General's office, and she has spent the last 15 years doing human trafficking stuff. And what's
She's
cool is her kids don't miss it. They don't really care. They've never had it. It's not a big deal to them.
Well, and how did did her kids get bullied? Because that's you're familiar with Bark. I love Bark.
The Bark video is a great video.
Yeah. And I show that video all the time, especially to principals and parents. It's like, this is why you want us in your classrooms. If you don't want to have that conversation, it's not a problem. That's why we're here. Right. And it's bring us in to talk to your kids. And the video, it says like within a minute, when she's 10 years old, less than a minute, she gets some kind of hit from some creepy guy.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try to emphasize with my friends, and as much as they're like, yeah, Jan, I'm like, stop putting pictures of your children on your social media page. Stop that. Because these predators will download the picture of your child. You can download any picture online.
Of course.
And start trading it. So those little pictures that, hey, little Sally's joining kindergarten this day, and it's like, okay, I now have a picture of the child. I now know she's in kindergarten because it's on the mother's page, and she's probably not private. I can get the zip code, so I can start to narrow down where this little girl is, and that is how they think. Parents don't want to hear this, but that is how they think.
For sure.
Is how can I get that right? So we're down to the last 12 minutes, and we just freaked a bunch of parents out. So everybody take a breath. Take a breath. Because we're here to also bring solutions, right? We want everyone trained. We want police officers trained. We want communities trained. We want kids trained. We want teachers trained, healthcare workers trained, right? But this is called Parent Tech Talk. So let's talk about parents. It's like, okay, we've now just scared the bejesus out of you. What can they do? Dan, if you were sitting in the living room with, 10 parents of teenagers, what would you tell them? What's the first thing you would coach them to do?
Well, the easiest thing and the first thing is just what we just talked about. Just there's really no reason that your kid has to have internet on their phone. They take their phone with them all the time. What's that phone for? That phone is so they can call you. They can call their father. They can call their brother. They can call their sister. You can say, hey, I'm coming to pick you up from school or from practice or whatever. They can call their friends. They can text message their friends. They can text message you. That's what that phone is for. That phone is not so simply so they can surf the internet all day. So that would be my first thing. Now, a lot of parents are going like, I'm never going to do that. I can never do that to my kids. Okay. My next step would be then you get some kind of really good software, and there's several different companies out there. You had mentioned Bark. They're a good one. And you get some software on your children's devices so that you can block certain things. You can also monitor what they do, and you're going to keep track of. The problem that I have with that, or with just parents saying, well, I'm just going to search my kid's phone from time to time. I'm going to really be involved. I'm going to pay attention. That's great for the first week or maybe two, but parents will get busy. Job will be coming in there. Things will be happening. And eventually you'll start blowing it off, and then you'll blow it off more, and you'll blow it off more, and you'll blow it off more. And eventually you won't keep track whether or not you have any of that stuff on there. Right. So honestly, to be safest is just get them like a Gab phone, GABE. That's a good option where they can call, they can text, but they don't have social media on their phone.
Right.
And then they don't have whatever. And then my other thing, number 2, would be.
Oh, we're at 4.
Oh, okay. Number four would be, don't let your kid take their laptop and go in their bedroom at night and stay in there for 5 hours.
Yeah.
That's danger all over it, because you're letting the guy in the van come in, and he's now in your kid's bedroom where you can't monitor and you can't see and you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Let your kid use the computer all he wants, or her or she wants. Just let him do it in the living room where you are, right? Have a computer space where they can sit and they can play games and they can surf social media. They can do YouTube. They can do whatever they want to do. Just put it in the living room where it's open for everybody, right?
Right.
It's not that complicated. It's not about being your kid's friend. It's about being their parent. And there's a difference.
If you've been on any of the parent portals, and Facebook groups, parents they're distraught. I was reading one earlier today about a mom whose son continually defies them, and she's like, I'm having a hard time finding a therapist. And one of the things we've coached parents is, I love having things on their device, but you can't just put them on and not have the conversation. You've got to have the conversation with your kids. And, we coach the parents. It's like, you've got to start this slowly, because the addictive nature of this thing is equal to or worse than an opioid.
Sure. It's a dopamine hit every time they get on it.
So taking that device away is literally like taking methamphetamines or other addictive drugs away from that human being and sticking them in a cold room by themselves, and then watching them detox and suffer, and the crying and wailing and gnashing of teeth. It just doesn't work. So I'm going to take it away, and we're all going to family phones in the basket for 15 minutes. We're going to play a board game. Right? Because you've got to fill up that time with something.
We're going to go on a hike. We're going to go for a walk. We're going to do a board game. We're going to teach the dog new tricks. We're going to do whatever, right?
We're going to go do sidewalk chalk. Anything. You've got to replenish that dopamine hit, but without this device, without the laptop, and quite frankly, even without the TV.
Yeah, I gave up TV several years ago, really because I think the biggest reason is I thought it was making me dumb. So I gave it up, and I haven't had cable or satellite or anything for years now. And it's one of the best things I ever did, because it gave me all this other time to do all these other more productive things in my life, and to go back to reading and doing other things that are way better than sitting in front of a TV and either watching something that's making me stupid or watching something that's making me angry. So that's
right.
So I go outside, I do things outside. I work, I read, I spend time with family. I, walk my dog, through the woods more, or whatever it is I'm doing. Way more productive.
Absolutely.
And it's good for your mind. It's good for your mind.
Yeah, it really does. It frees your brain up. My goal is to walk every morning, and then I do some yoga. And if I don't walk, I do yoga every day and do my little meditation. My friend Franklin, I'll give him Franklin a shout out here on Facebook. He a year and a half ago when all this started, he's like, Jan, I started meditating 20 minutes a day. He goes, it's changed my life. I'm like, all right, I'll take that on because I pray, right? But
Sure.
meditation, he goes, prayer. He said, Jan, from my point of view, prayer is you're talking to God. Meditation, you're listening. I'm like, oh, I like that. But the mindfulness, especially now. And I think, having the conversation with your kids about, okay, what can we do? We are doing this, right? We are going to decrease our time in front of machines. We are going to decrease our time in, with the phone. What are some things you want to do? Right. And have it be a family solution versus the on high. And the other thing that we coach parents to do is I said, look, I said, I will not download TikTok. I have a bunch of my mission ambassadors. They have TikTok. You do TikTok. I don't do TikTok. This is my platform, really Facebook and Instagram. I don't understand it, and that's okay. Is if I get my message out and it helps people, that's all I care about. And to be able to go to your kids and go, so tell me about this TikTok thing. Like I hear about it. I know you have it. Teach me. And so putting the parent, this way, instead of parent talking to kid, altering the scale and having the child teach the parent really builds that skill and builds that rapport and creates that bond of having the child feel like they've got knowledge. And then you as the parent, you're getting a really good understanding about what they're doing and what they're dealing with and who their friends are on TikTok and what they're following. And, gives you really good insight into your child.
Yeah, for sure.
That you can come back later and have that dialogue with,
100%. 100%
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, yeah. All right. So we've got 4 minutes. So if someone wants to find you, if someone's like, oh my gosh, my husband works for blank blank PD, we need to have you in here, or I work at XYZ business and we'd love to bring your training in, or a PI firm or whatever. How can people get a hold of you?
So our website is the human trafficking training center.com, just all together, human trafficking training center.com. You can email me at Dan, at the human trafficking training center, humantraffickingtrainingcenter.com. And then you can also call me or text me like you do a lot.
I don't mean to be a nudge.
No, it's all good. So you can do that. My number is 417-844.
Really, hang on. You're going to give people your phone number?
Yeah,
Okay,
I will.
here we
Yeah, I
go.
will, because
All right, 417
844
844
5834.
345834.
And we do law enforcement. We do, like I said, medical personnel. We even do community events. We have a 7-hour community event, community class that we like to promote as being the most comprehensive human trafficking training that civilians can get. I mean, we tried to include everything that we could in that training that is not law enforcement sensitive, or that would not hamper law enforcement in any way, but we felt like it was important to teach the community, right?
Absolutely.
And we are in the process, and I think it's going to be done maybe within the next 3-4 weeks. We should have an online version of that community class, so you could actually go to the training online just through our website, so you could get it anywhere in America, or really anywhere in the world for that matter.
Right.
But if you would like a community event, we come and we do those. It's like we can do them on a weekend because that's when most people want to do them. So we do a lot of Saturdays, and we do the whole 7 hours on Saturday, and we teach you everything that you can possibly put into your brain about human trafficking and kids and technology and the whole thing. So yeah, if you want to sponsor a class or anything you want to do, just let us know.
Well, Dan, thank you. Thanks for being a yes to having this conversation with me. Thanks for, as usual, this time's gone quickly. We can talk for hours, especially when you're driving.
We can.
You're driving from Kansas City to the middle of, wherever. Just thank you for your commitment, and thank you for making a real difference in the communities you're in. When we've got law enforcement that are empowered to really understand what human trafficking is, and when we've got healthcare workers that are very clear, and it makes a difference. Lives can be saved, really. And I
Yep.
know that 'cause I've seen it and I've witnessed it. So Dan, just
Sure.
thank you so very much for your time tonight. I appreciate you. I appreciate all that you do. And everybody that's listening and watching in the replay, you've got all of Dan's information. So if you've got law enforcement you want trained, call Dan. Y'all have a great night.
Thank you. See you, everybody. Thanks, Jan.
Mm-hmm.